Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display showing her test results, her heart sinking with each failing grade that appeared. Mathematics, 23%. Physics, 31%. Quantum mechanics, 18%. The red numbers seemed to mock her as they floated in the air above her desk at the Galactic Academy of Sciences. "Miss Chen," came the cold, mechanical voice of Professor Zyxthera, the Colonian instructor whose crystalline features never showed emotion. "Your performance continues to be disappointing." The tall, blue-skinned alien stood at the front of the classroom, her forearms crossed in what humans had learned was a gesture of extreme displeasure among her species. Her large, multifaceted eyes scanned the room, landing on each of the 12 human students who had been selected for this prestigious exchange program. Sarah felt the familiar burn of embarrassment creep up her neck. Around her, the other alien students, Colonians, Vorthak, and Zephyrians, whispered among themselves in their various languages. She caught enough of their words to know they were discussing the primitive human and her inability to grasp even basic concepts. "Perhaps," Professor Zyxthera continued, her voice carrying that particular tone that made Sarah's skin crawl, "the human education system has failed to prepare you for actual learning. Your species seems to rely too heavily on memorization rather than true understanding." Marcus, another human student sitting 2 rows behind Sarah, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Like Sarah, his grades had been consistently poor since arriving at the academy 6 months ago. The entire human contingent was struggling, and the alien faculty made no effort to hide their growing disappointment. "I would like to remind all students," the professor announced, turning to face the holographic board where complex equations appeared and disappeared in rapid succession, "that next week we will be conducting our final examinations using the new binary assessment system. This method will test your true comprehension of the material, not your ability to guess correct answers." A Vorthak student, whose name Sarah could never pronounce correctly, raised one of his tentacle-like appendages. "Professor, what exactly is a binary assessment?" Professor Zyxthera's eyes seemed to brighten if such a thing were possible with her species. "An excellent question, Gorth Liminer. The binary system presents problems with only 2 possible solutions, completely correct or completely incorrect. There is no partial credit, no approximations, and no room for the kind of creative interpretation that some species," her gaze pointedly swept over the human students, "seem to favor." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had been struggling enough with regular tests where she could at least earn partial points for showing her work or getting close to the right answer. A system where everything was either right or wrong would be impossible. "The binary system," the professor continued, clearly enjoying herself, "was developed by the Ethereal Collective, a species known for their logical perfection. It strips away all ambiguity and reveals the student's true understanding of the material. I predict it will be quite illuminating." After class, Sarah walked slowly through the academy's corridors, her backpack feeling heavier than usual. The academy was a marvel of interspecies architecture, with sections designed to accommodate the various environmental needs of different alien races. The Colonian section, where most of her classes were held, featured high ceilings and crystal-like structures that reflected light in patterns that supposedly enhanced their species' cognitive abilities. She paused at one of the large windows that offered a view of the planet's 3 moons hanging in the purple sky. Earth seemed impossibly far away. When she had been selected for this program, it had felt like winning the lottery. The chance to study alongside the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, to learn from beings whose technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, it had been a dream come true. Now it felt more like a nightmare. "Sarah, wait up." Marcus jogged to catch up with her, his own expression grim. "Did you hear what she said about the binary tests?" "Hard to miss," Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off the alien landscape beyond the window. "Sounds like we're about to fail spectacularly in a whole new way." "This is crazy," Marcus said, leaning against the wall. "I was valedictorian at MIT. Top of my class in theoretical physics. But, here? I might as well be in kindergarten." Sarah understood his frustration. She had graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with degrees in both mathematics and computer science. On Earth, she was considered brilliant. Here, she was apparently too stupid to understand basic concepts. Maybe we should consider requesting a transfer back to Earth, Marcus suggested quietly. Before we embarrass ourselves further. The thought had crossed Sarah's mind more than once, but something inside her rebelled against the idea. And prove them right? That humans aren't smart enough to hang with the big kids? Better than failing publicly, Marcus muttered. They walked in silence for a while, passing other students from various species. A group of Zephyrian students floated by, their gossamer wings keeping them airborne as they discussed complex mathematical theorems in their musical language. Everything seemed so effortless for them. There's something that's been bothering me, Sarah said as they reached the human dormitory section. Have you noticed how they teach here? Marcus looked at her curiously. What do you mean? Everything is about memorizing formulas and reproducing exact solutions. There's no exploration, no creative problem solving. It's like they want us to become computers. Maybe that's how advanced civilizations learn, Marcus suggested. Pure logic, no emotional interference. Sarah shook her head. But that's not how humans work best. We innovate, we adapt, we find new ways to solve old problems. We don't just memorize, we understand by doing, by experimenting, by making mistakes. Try telling Professor ZYXthera that, Marcus said with a bitter laugh. That evening, Sarah sat in her small dormitory room, staring at her computer screen. She had been trying to study for the binary examination, but her mind kept wandering. The Colonian teaching methods felt wrong somehow, like trying to force a round peg into a square hole. She pulled up some of her old work from Stanford, problems she had solved using unconventional methods that had impressed her professors. Here at the Academy, those same creative approaches were dismissed as inefficient or imprecise. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Sarah's heart lifted when she saw it was from Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, her former professor and mentor at Stanford. Sarah, I hope you're doing well at the Academy. I know the adjustment must be challenging. I wanted to share something interesting that might boost your confidence. I've been working with some of the data you sent me from your coursework there, and I think you might be approaching problems in ways that the alien instructors don't recognize as valid. Remember, different doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes the most innovative solutions come from those who think differently. Keep your chin up. Dr. Hawkins. Sarah read the message twice, feeling a small spark of hope. Maybe her struggles weren't entirely due to inadequacy. Maybe there was something else going on. She spent the next hour reviewing her failed assignments, looking at them with fresh eyes. In several cases, she had arrived at correct answers using methods that were completely different from what the professor had taught. But, because her approach didn't match the expected solution path, she had been marked wrong. The more she looked, the more frustrated she became. It wasn't that she didn't understand the material, it was that she understood it differently. The next morning brought news that made Sarah's blood run cold. Professor ZYXthera announced that the binary examinations would be broadcast live to the Galactic Education Council as a demonstration of the new testing system. Representatives from dozens of species would be watching, including officials from Earth's newly formed Interstellar Education Department. This will be an excellent opportunity, the professor said, her crystalline features reflecting the classroom lights, to showcase the varying levels of intellectual development among the galaxy's species. Sarah caught the meaningful look the professor shot toward the human students. The message was clear: they were going to be the negative examples, the demonstration of what happened when a primitive species tried to play in the big leagues. During the lunch break, Sarah found herself in the Academy's library, a vast space that housed knowledge from across the galaxy. She wasn't studying for the test, what was the point, but rather researching something that had been nagging at her. She pulled up information about binary systems, not the examination format, but the mathematical concept that had given birth to modern computing on Earth. As she read, an idea began to form in her mind. It was crazy, probably impossible, but it was the first thing that had given her hope in months. Binary mathematics was, at its core, a human innovation. While other species had developed complex computational systems using various numerical bases, humans had taken the simple concept of ones and zeros and built entire technological civilizations on it. Every computer, every smartphone, every piece of digital technology relied on binary logic. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard as she researched further. The Ethereal Collective, the species that had developed the binary examination system, were known for their logical perfection, but their mathematics were based on a base 12 system that reflected their 12-fingered anatomy. The idea of reducing everything to simple binary choices was actually foreign to their natural way of thinking. But, for humans, binary logic was fundamental. It was how they had learned to communicate with machines, how they had built artificial intelligence, how they had created the digital revolution. While other species saw binary as limiting, humans saw it as powerful in its simplicity. Sarah's research revealed something even more interesting. The binary examination system was relatively new, developed only recently by the Ethereal Collective as a response to criticism that their traditional testing methods were biased toward certain species. The galaxy's educators were still learning how to properly implement it. As she read, Sarah began to understand something that made her pulse quicken. The binary examination system wasn't just about right or wrong answers, it was about logical pathways, decision trees, and algorithmic thinking. These were areas where humans excelled, where their unique approach to problem solving could actually be an advantage. She thought about her failed assignments again, but this time with a different perspective. Her unconventional methods, the ones that had been dismissed as wrong, were actually examples of binary logic at work. She had been breaking complex problems down into series of yes/no decisions, true/false statements, 1/0 choices. The alien professors hadn't recognized it because they were looking for complex, multi-layered solutions that reflected their own species' cognitive strengths. They had been grading her binary thinking using non-binary criteria. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: excitement. She spent the rest of the afternoon reaching out to the other human students, sharing her theory and her research. Initially, they were skeptical. Marcus, in particular, was convinced that she was grasping at straws, looking for hope where none existed. Even if you're right about the binary logic thing, he argued, we still don't know the material well enough to pass these tests. But that's just it, Sarah insisted. We've been trying to learn the material their way, using their methods. What if we approach it our way? She showed them examples of how human binary logic could be applied to the problems they had been struggling with. Instead of memorizing complex formulas, they could break each problem down into a series of logical decisions. Instead of trying to think like aliens, they could think like humans. Slowly, the other students began to see what she was getting at. Jenny, a biochemistry major from Oxford, was the first to really understand. It's like debugging code, she said excitedly. You don't need to understand every line of a program to find the error. You just follow the logic tree until you find where it breaks. Exactly, Sarah said. And that's what these binary tests are, logic trees. We just need to follow them the way humans naturally do. The group spent the evening working together, approaching their study material from this new angle. They began to see patterns they had missed before, logical pathways that made sense when viewed through the lens of binary thinking. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Sarah went to sleep feeling confident about an upcoming examination. She had no idea that her small breakthrough was about to change the way the galaxy viewed human intelligence, or that Professor ZYX's dismissive attitude would soon transform into something approaching respect. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's dreams were filled with streams of ones and zeros, branching decision trees, and the satisfying logic of binary systems. Tomorrow would bring the examination that was supposed to demonstrate human intellectual inferiority. Instead, it would showcase the unique cognitive strengths that had made humanity a technological powerhouse, even if they themselves didn't fully understand those strengths yet. The examination hall buzzed with nervous energy as students from across the galaxy took their seats. Sarah looked around at the massive amphitheater, its curved walls lined with holographic displays that would broadcast the proceedings to educational institutions throughout known space. She had never imagined that her academic struggles would become galactic entertainment. Professor ZYX stood at the center of the hall, her crystalline features catching the light from dozens of recording devices. Around her, other faculty members from various species served as proctors, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical as they observed the human students. Before we begin, Professor ZYX announced, her voice amplified throughout the hall. I would like to acknowledge our distinguished observers from the Galactic Education Council. She gestured toward an elevated viewing area where representatives from dozens of worlds sat in specialized seating designed for their various physiologies. Sarah spotted the human delegation, 3 officials from Earth's Interstellar Education Department, looking nervous and out of place among the assembled alien dignitaries. She felt a pang of sympathy for them. They had probably expected to witness a triumph of human intellectual achievement, not what was likely to be a very public demonstration of humanity's academic limitations. Today's examination, the professor continued, will utilize the Ethereal Collective's binary assessment protocol. Each question will present a scenario with only 2 possible solutions, completely correct or completely incorrect. There will be no partial credit, no approximations, and no allowances for creative interpretation. A Zephyrian student's wings fluttered nervously, creating a soft musical sound that echoed through the hall. Even the advanced alien students seemed anxious about this new testing method. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to center herself. The previous evening's study session with her fellow humans had given her hope, but now, faced with the reality of the situation, doubts began to creep in. What if her theory about binary logic was just wishful thinking? What if humans really were intellectually inferior to the galaxy's other sentient species? You may begin, Professor ZYX announced as holographic screens materialized in front of each student. Sarah stared at the first problem, her heart racing. It was a complex quantum mechanics scenario involving particle interactions in a multi-dimensional field. Under normal circumstances, she would have panicked, tried to remember the specific formula she was supposed to use, and, inevitably gotten it wrong. Instead, she forced herself to think differently. She read the problem again, this time breaking it down into component parts. Was the particle spin aligned with the field? Yes or no? Did the energy level support quantum tunneling? Yes or no? Would the interaction result in coherent or incoherent states? Each question led to the next in a logical chain. Sarah found herself constructing a decision tree in her mind, following each branch until she reached the inevitable conclusion. The answer wasn't about memorizing complex equations, it was about following logical pathways. She entered her response and moved to the next question. Meanwhile, across the hall, Marcus was having his own revelation. The second problem dealt with stellar formation in regions of high dark matter density. Instead of trying to recall the exact gravitational equations the Colonian professors had taught, he approached it like debugging a piece of code. If the dark matter density exceeded threshold X, then certain conditions would follow. If those conditions were met, then stellar nucleation would either occur or not occur based on temperature gradients. Each step was binary, each decision point clear. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Marcus felt like he understood what he was doing. Jenny, working on a biochemistry problem involving enzyme interactions, discovered that her human intuition for molecular bonding patterns actually aligned perfectly with binary logic. Either a bond would form or it wouldn't. Either an enzyme would catalyze a reaction or it would inhibit it. The complex chemical formulas she had been struggling to memorize became simple yes/no decisions. Around the hall, alien students worked with their characteristic precision and methodology. The Colonians approached each problem with crystalline logic, their forearms moving in synchronized patterns as they manipulated holographic equations. The Vortex students used their tentacle appendages to create three-dimensional models of theoretical concepts. The Zephyrians seemed to dance through their solutions, their movements somehow translating to mathematical precision. But the humans were doing something different. They weren't trying to emulate alien methods anymore. They were thinking like humans. Professor ZYX moved through the hall, observing the students' work. She paused behind Sarah, expecting to see the familiar signs of human struggle, confused expressions, hesitant inputs, frequent corrections. Instead, she saw something unexpected. Sarah was working with steady confidence, her fingers moving quickly across the holographic interface. Her approach to the problems was unlike anything the professor had seen before. Instead of following the standard mathematical pathways that other species used, Sarah seemed to be breaking each problem down into its most basic components and rebuilding the solution from the ground up. The professor's multifaceted eyes studied the human's work more closely. Sarah's method was elegant in its simplicity, but it was also fundamentally different from accepted academic approaches. She was treating each complex problem as a series of binary decisions, creating logical pathways that led to correct answers through unconventional routes. Professor Zyxthera moved on to observe Marcus, then Jenny, then the other human students. To her growing surprise, they were all displaying similar patterns. Their approaches were different from each other and different from anything she had seen from students of other species, but they were working with a confidence that had been completely absent from their previous performances. In the viewing area above, the alien dignitaries were beginning to take notice as well. Dr. Vorthek, a distinguished Colonian educator, leaned toward his colleague. The humans appear to be performing differently than expected, he observed in their crystalline language. Indeed, replied Professor Zendara, a Zephyrian specialist in comparative cognition. Their neural patterns, as displayed on the monitoring systems, show unusual activity in regions associated with computational logic and decision tree processing. The human delegation watched nervously as data streams showed their students' progress through the examination. They couldn't interpret the alien monitoring systems, but they could see that something was happening. The humans weren't failing immediately as had been expected. Sarah moved through the problems methodically, each solution building her confidence. A question about gravitational wave propagation became a series of decisions about energy transfer and spacetime distortion. A problem involving genetic expression patterns resolved into logical chains about protein synthesis and cellular regulation. She wasn't memorizing alien formulas or trying to think like a Colonian or Vorthak. She was thinking like a human, using the same logical processes that had built Earth's digital civilization. By the midpoint of the examination, something remarkable was happening. The humans weren't just keeping pace with their alien classmates, they were completing problems faster than anyone had expected. Their solutions were arriving through different pathways than the standard approaches, but they were arriving nonetheless. Professor Zyxthera found herself studying the humans' work with growing fascination. Their methods were so fundamentally different that she initially struggled to understand how they were reaching correct conclusions. It was only when she began to trace their logical pathways that she realized what was happening. The humans were naturally thinking in binary terms. Every complex problem was being reduced to a series of yes/no decisions, true/false statements, on/off switches. It was a completely different cognitive approach from anything in the galactic educational literature. Fascinating, she murmured to herself, forgetting for a moment that her comments were being recorded for the galactic broadcast. Dr. Alexander, a member of the ethereal collective observing from the viewing area, was the first to fully understand what was happening. His species had developed the binary assessment system, and he recognized the logical patterns the humans were displaying. They are demonstrating natural binary cognition, he said to his colleagues, his translator device converting his thoughts into various languages for the assembled dignitaries. Their species appears to have evolved thinking patterns that align perfectly with binary logic systems. The implications of this observation rippled through the viewing area. Binary logic was considered one of the most advanced mathematical concepts in galactic education, yet these humans seemed to be applying it instinctively. Sarah reached the final section of the examination, a series of problems that combined multiple disciplines in complex theoretical scenarios. These were the questions designed to separate the truly exceptional students from the merely competent. Under normal circumstances, she would have been completely overwhelmed. Instead, she approached the final problems with the same methodical binary thinking that had carried her through the earlier sections. Each multidisciplinary challenge became a series of interconnected decision trees. Physics informed chemistry, which informed biology, which informed engineering, all connected through logical pathways that felt natural to her human cognition. Around her, she could hear the alien students struggling with these final problems. Their various species' cognitive strengths were being pushed to their limits by the examination's design. But, for Sarah and the other humans, the complexity seemed to make their binary approach even more effective. Complex systems were, after all, just collections of simple interactions. and simple interactions were exactly what binary logic was designed to handle. As the examination time drew to a close, Sarah entered her final answers with a confidence she couldn't have imagined at the beginning of the day. She looked around at her fellow human students and saw similar expressions of cautious optimism on their faces. They had done something different. They had stopped trying to be alien and had instead embraced their humanity. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen, but, for the first time since arriving at the academy, Sarah felt like herself again. Professor ZYX called time, and the holographic interfaces disappeared. The hall fell silent as the automated grading systems began processing the responses. In the viewing area, alien dignitaries leaned forward in anticipation. The human delegation held their breath. Results will be available in one standard time unit, Professor ZYX announced. Students are dismissed until the results presentation. As the students filed out of the hall, Sarah caught glimpses of the monitoring displays that the faculty were studying. She couldn't read the alien text, but she could see graphs and charts showing performance patterns. Something about the data seemed to be causing considerable discussion among the alien educators. "Do you think we did okay?" Jenny whispered as they walked toward the exit. "I think we did better than okay," Sarah replied, though she kept her voice low. "I think we did something nobody expected." Behind them, unheard by the departing students, Professor ZYX was engaged in intense discussion with her colleagues. The preliminary data analysis was showing results that challenged everything the galactic education community thought they knew about human cognitive abilities. The humans hadn't just passed the binary examination. They had excelled at it in ways that suggested their species possessed unique intellectual capabilities that had been completely overlooked by standard assessment methods. As Sarah and her fellow humans left the examination hall, they had no idea that their performance was about to transform the galaxy's understanding of human intelligence, or that Professor ZYX dismissive attitude toward their species was beginning to crack under the weight of unexpected evidence. The hour between the examination's end and the results presentation felt like an eternity. Sarah and the other human students gathered in the Academy's central plaza, a vast open space surrounded by architectural marvels from a dozen different civilizations. The nervous energy was palpable as students from various species clustered together, discussing their performance in hushed tones. Sarah noticed that the alien students seemed unusually subdued. Typically, post-examination conversations were filled with confident discussions about solution methods and expected grades. Today, however, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that she had never witnessed before. "I have never encountered problems quite like those," admitted Gorth Liminer, the Vorthack student who usually dominated class discussions. His tentacle appendages writhed in what Sarah had learned was a sign of confusion among his species. "The logic pathways seemed almost primitive in their simplicity, yet I found myself struggling to follow them." A group of Zephyrian students floated nearby, their gossamer wings creating soft harmonics as they discussed the examination. Sarah caught fragments of their musical language and was surprised to hear notes of uncertainty rather than their usual confident melodies. "The humans appeared to work with unusual efficiency during the final sections," observed one of the Colonian students, her crystalline voice carrying further than intended. "Their solution methods were unlike anything in our academic databases." Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus and Jenny. They had noticed the attention their work had attracted during the examination, but hearing it confirmed by their alien classmates was both gratifying and nerve-wracking. "Maybe we should have failed," Marcus whispered. "At least then, we'd know what to expect." Before Sarah could respond, an announcement echoed through the plaza in multiple languages. "All students report to the examination hall for results presentation." The walk back to the amphitheater felt like a march to judgment. Sarah's earlier confidence began to waver as doubts crept in. What if her binary logic theory had been wrong? What if they had failed spectacularly and would now have their inadequacies broadcast to the galaxy? The amphitheater was even more crowded than before. Word of the humans' unusual performance had apparently spread, drawing additional observers from across the academy. Sarah spotted faculty members she had never seen before, including some whose species she couldn't identify. Professor ZYX stood at the center of the hall, but her demeanor was noticeably different from earlier. The confident superiority she usually displayed had been replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. Her forearms moved in small, agitated gestures as she consulted with other faculty members. Before we announce the results, Professor Zyxthara began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. I must address some unusual patterns observed during today's examination. Sarah's heart sank. They were going to be called out for their unconventional methods. She had been naive to think that being different would be viewed positively. The binary assessment system was designed to eliminate the advantages that certain species' cognitive patterns might have in traditional testing formats, the professor continued. It was intended to create a level playing field where pure logical reasoning would determine success. She paused, her multifaceted eyes scanning the assembled students before focusing on the human section. Today's results have revealed something unexpected about the relationship between species-specific cognition and binary logic systems. In the viewing area, the alien dignitaries leaned forward intently. The human delegation looked pale with anxiety. The examination results show a clear correlation between performance and cognitive approach, Professor Zyxthara announced. Students who attempted to apply traditional solution methodologies to the binary format achieved expected results. However, students who demonstrated natural binary thinking patterns significantly exceeded all projections. Sarah held her breath. Was this good news or bad news? Individual results will now be displayed, the professor said, and holographic screens appeared throughout the hall showing student names and scores. Sarah's eyes found her name on the display, and she had to read it 3 times before the numbers made sense. Mathematics, 97%. Physics, 94%. Quantum mechanics, 96%. Overall score, 95%. Around her, gasps and exclamations erupted from other students as they saw the results. Marcus had scored 93% overall. Jenny had achieved 91%. Every human student had not only passed but had scored in the top tier of the class. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The alien students, who had consistently outperformed the humans all semester, had struggled with the binary format. Many had barely passed, and some had failed entirely. Gorthliminer stared at his 67% overall score in disbelief. The Zephyrian students, accustomed to being academic stars, found themselves clustered around the 70% mark. Even the Colonian students, studying in their native facility with their own professors, had scored significantly lower than the humans. This is impossible, muttered one of the Vorthack students. There must be an error in the grading system. Professor Zyxthara raised one of her arms for silence. The results have been verified multiple times using independent grading protocols. There is no error. She turned to address the viewing area where the galactic observers sat in stunned silence. The data suggests that the human students possess cognitive patterns that are naturally aligned with binary logic systems. Their approach to problem solving appears to be fundamentally different from established galactic educational models. Dr. Alexander of the Ethereal Collective rose from his seat in the viewing area. As the creator species of the binary assessment system, his words carried considerable weight. May we observe the human solution methodologies? Their performance suggests they have intuited principles that my people spent millennia developing. Professor Zyxthara nodded and gestured toward Sarah. Miss Chen, would you demonstrate your approach to problem 17 for our observers? Sarah's mouth went dry. She was being asked to explain her methods to some of the galaxy's most advanced intellects. On shaky legs, she made her way to the center of the hall where a holographic display materialized showing the quantum mechanics problem. I didn't use the standard formulas, she began hesitantly. Instead, I broke the problem down into basic questions. Is the particle's energy above the barrier threshold? Yes. Does the wave function support tunneling probability? Yes. Given the field conditions, will the particle maintain coherence? No. She continued walking through her decision tree, showing how each binary choice led to the next logical step. The alien observers watched intently as Sarah's simple yes/no progressions elegantly solved a problem that typically required complex mathematical calculations. Each question has only two possible answers, Sarah explained, gaining confidence as she spoke. But, when you chain them together, they create pathways to the solution. It's like following a roadmap where every intersection only has two choices, but the right combination of turns gets you where you need to go. Dr. Alexander's translator device hummed as he processed this explanation. Remarkable. Your species appears to think in decision trees naturally. This is the foundation of all advanced computational systems, yet you apply it instinctively. Professor Zyxthera's crystalline features reflected the hall's lights as she studied Sarah's demonstration. Your methodology completely bypasses traditional mathematical complexity. You reduce graduate-level problems to series of fundamental logical decisions. That's how humans built our computers, Marcus called out from the students section, his earlier nervousness forgotten in the excitement of the moment. Everything in our digital technology is based on binary code, ones and zeros, on and off, yes and no. A ripple of understanding passed through the alien observers. The humans hadn't succeeded despite their primitive education, they had succeeded because their cognitive development had naturally aligned with the most fundamental principles of logical reasoning. Jenny stood up next to Marcus. We've been trying to learn your way of thinking all semester. But, today, when we just thought like humans, everything made sense. Professor Zandara, the Zephyrian specialist, fluttered her wings in what Sarah had learned was a gesture of academic excitement. This explains the performance patterns we observed. The humans weren't struggling with the material itself, they were struggling with non-human approaches to the material. The implications began to cascade through the assembled academics. If humans naturally thought in binary patterns, it suggested their species had evolved cognitive abilities that were uniquely suited to certain types of advanced logical reasoning. This raises significant questions about our assessment methodologies, admitted Dr. Vorthek, the distinguished Colonian educator. We have been measuring human intelligence using tools designed for non-human cognition. Professor Zyxthera found herself in the unprecedented position of having to re-evaluate everything she thought she knew about human intellectual capacity. The students she had dismissed as academically inferior had just demonstrated mastery of concepts that challenged some of the galaxy's most advanced minds. I owe you an apology, she said, addressing the human students directly. I failed to recognize that your difficulties were not due to intellectual limitations but to pedagogical incompatibility. You were not failing to learn, I was failing to teach you in a way that leveraged your cognitive strengths. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and generosity toward the professor who had made her life miserable for months. You couldn't have known, she replied. We didn't know ourselves until today. But the revelation went far beyond individual academic performance. In the viewing area, representatives from various galactic institutions were already discussing the broader implications. If humans had unique cognitive abilities, what other talents might they possess that had been overlooked or misunderstood? The ethereal collective representative was particularly intrigued. We would like to invite human students to participate in our advanced computational research projects. Your natural binary thinking could prove invaluable in developing next-generation logical systems. Other offers quickly followed. The Vorthek Institute wanted human perspectives on decision-making algorithms. The Zephyrian Science Council was interested in human approaches to pattern recognition. Even the traditionally insular Colonian Academic Consortium expressed interest in collaboration. Sarah looked around at her fellow human students, seeing the same mixture of amazement and possibility in their faces. They had come to the academy feeling intellectually inferior, struggling to keep up with their alien classmates. Now they were being courted by the galaxy's most prestigious research institutions. There is one more thing, Dr. Alexander announced, his translated voice cutting through the excited conversations. Based on today's results, the Ethereal Collective formally requests that humans be included in the development of next-generation educational assessment systems. Your cognitive patterns may hold the key to creating truly universal evaluation methods. Professor Zyxthera nodded slowly, her earlier prejudices crumbling under the weight of evidence. I believe a complete re-evaluation of human academic placement is in order. These students should be advanced to graduate-level coursework immediately, with curricula designed to leverage their unique cognitive strengths. As the formal proceedings concluded and students began to file out of the hall, Sarah felt a profound shift in how she viewed herself and humanity's place in the galactic community. They weren't the slow students struggling to keep up with their intellectual superiors. They were a species with unique cognitive gifts that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The journey from academic failure to galactic recognition had taken just one day, but Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. Now they had to prove that this breakthrough was not a fluke but the first glimpse of humanity's true potential among the stars. 3 months after the binary examination that changed everything, Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council of Advanced Sciences, preparing to present research that would have been unimaginable during her early struggles at the Academy. The massive chamber accommodated representatives from 47 different species, each seated in specialized environments designed for their unique physiological needs. The transformation in her life had been remarkable. What started as academic failure had evolved into something unprecedented, the first interspecies collaborative research program specifically designed around human cognitive strengths. Sarah had been appointed as the human coordinator, working alongside teams from the Ethereal Collective, the Vorthak Institute, and even the traditionally isolated Colonian Research Consortium. Honored delegates, Sarah began, her voice carried throughout the chamber by universal translators. 6 months ago, humanity was considered intellectually inferior by galactic academic standards. Today, I present evidence that cognitive diversity represents the greatest untapped resource in our shared scientific community. Professor Zyxthara sat in the Colonian section, her crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights. The professor who had once dismissed human intelligence as primitive now served as Sarah's academic mentor, having completely revolutionized her teaching methods based on the binary examination revelations. Sarah's presentation hologram displayed the research outcomes that had emerged from human-alien collaboration. When human binary thinking was combined with Colonian crystalline logic, we achieved a 37% improvement in quantum field calculations. When Zephyrian pattern recognition was enhanced by human decision tree processing, we solved protein folding problems that had challenged the galaxy for decades. The data was undeniable. Every collaborative project had produced results that exceeded what any single species could achieve alone. The key was recognizing and leveraging the unique cognitive strengths each species brought to the table. Marcus, now leading a team of human and Vorthak researchers, had developed new approaches to stellar cartography that revolutionized space navigation. His binary decision-making processes, combined with Vorthak spatial reasoning, had created mapping systems that were both more accurate and more efficient than anything previously developed. Jenny's work with Zephyrian biochemists had led to breakthroughs in synthetic biology. Her human ability to break complex problems into simple logical chains perfectly complemented the Zephyrians' intuitive understanding of biological systems, resulting in treatments for diseases that had plagued multiple species for generations. The implications extend far beyond academic performance, Sarah continued. We have discovered that cognitive diversity is not just beneficial, it is essential for solving the complex challenges facing our galactic community. Dr. Alexander of the Ethereal Collective rose from his specialized seating platform. The human contribution to our computational research has been extraordinary. Their natural binary thinking has allowed us to develop logical systems that we previously thought were impossible. The transformation had not been without challenges. Many institutions had to completely restructure their educational and research programs to accommodate different cognitive approaches. Some alien academics had initially resisted the changes, unable to accept that their traditional methods might not be universally optimal. But the results spoke for themselves. Research productivity across the galaxy had increased dramatically wherever human-alien collaborative programs had been implemented. Problems that had stymied brilliant minds for decades were suddenly yielding to the power of combined cognitive approaches. Professor Zyxthara has asked me to share the reformed curriculum we developed at the Academy, Sarah said, highlighting the educational innovations that had emerged from their experiences. Instead of forcing all students to learn through species-specific methods, we now offer multiple pathways to the same knowledge, each designed to leverage different cognitive strengths. The reformed education system had become a model for institutions across the galaxy. Students were no longer expected to conform to a single learning style. Instead, they could choose approaches that aligned with their species' natural cognitive patterns while still mastering the required material. Colonian students could pursue their traditional crystalline logic pathways. Zephyrians could learn through pattern recognition and intuitive reasoning. Vortex students could use their spatial manipulation abilities. And humans could apply their binary decision-making processes. The result was not just better academic performance, it was a generation of students who understood that intelligence came in many forms, each valuable and necessary. The most significant discovery, Sarah explained, is that cognitive diversity creates emergent intelligence. When different thinking patterns are combined, they produce insights that no single approach could achieve. This principle had already been applied to some of the galaxy's most pressing challenges. Climate restoration projects combined human logical analysis with alien environmental intuition. Space exploration missions used human decision-making algorithms enhanced by alien sensory capabilities. Even diplomatic negotiations benefited from teams that included multiple cognitive perspectives. Admiral Fexbar of the Galactic Defense Force had specifically requested human involvement in strategic planning. Their binary approach to tactical decision-making, he had reported, provides clarity in complex combat scenarios that our traditional methods cannot match. The economic implications were equally significant. Trade negotiations that had been stalled for years were suddenly moving forward when human logical analysis was combined with alien cultural understanding. Resource allocation problems that had seemed intractable yielded to multi-species thinking teams. We proposed the establishment of the Galactic Cognitive Diversity Initiative, Sarah announced, reaching the climax of her presentation. This program would systematically identify and develop the unique cognitive strengths of all known species, creating collaborative frameworks that maximize our collective intelligence. The chamber buzzed with discussion in dozens of languages as delegates considered the proposal. The implications were staggering not just for education and research, but for the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. Dr. Vorthek, the distinguished Colonian educator who had initially been skeptical of human abilities, stood to address the assembly. 6 months ago, I viewed cognitive standardization as the goal of galactic education. Today, I recognize that cognitive diversity is our greatest strength. The Colonian Academic Consortium votes to support this initiative. Similar endorsements followed from other species representatives. The Zephyrians, whose musical language filled the chamber with harmonious support, were enthusiastic backers. The Vorthak delegation, after extensive tentacle-waving deliberation, added their approval. Even the traditionally conservative Ethereal Collective, despite their usual reluctance to embrace change, recognized the overwhelming evidence in favor of cognitive diversity. Professor ZYX Thera was invited to address the assembly as one of the program's early advocates. I confess that I was among those who initially viewed differences as deficiencies, she admitted. The humans taught me that what I perceived as academic failure was actually cognitive innovation. My role as an educator is not to force conformity but to nurture the unique strengths each student brings to the learning environment. The transformation in Professor ZYX Thera had been as dramatic as the changes in her human students. She had become one of the galaxy's leading advocates for educational reform, developing teaching methods that celebrated rather than suppressed cognitive diversity. Her former dismissive attitude toward human intelligence had been replaced by genuine respect and fascination. She frequently collaborated with human researchers, finding that their logical approaches provided perfect complements to Colonian analytical methods. The binary examination that started this revolution, Professor ZYX Thera continued, was intended to demonstrate human intellectual limitations. Instead, it revealed that our assessment methods were the limitation. We were measuring intelligence with the wrong tools. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the professor who had unknowingly set in motion the events that transformed not just human academic standing but galactic understanding of intelligence itself. The examination that was supposed to prove human inferiority had instead demonstrated that intelligence was far more diverse and valuable than anyone had imagined. As the formal voting concluded with unanimous support for the Cognitive Diversity Initiative, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about her early struggles, the crushing sense of intellectual inadequacy, and the fear that humans might not belong among the galaxy's advanced civilizations. Now, human cognitive patterns were recognized as essential to galactic scientific progress. Research institutions competed for human collaboration. Educational systems across known space were being reformed based on principles derived from human learning patterns. The initiative will begin implementation immediately, announced the council president, a member of an ancient species known for their administrative wisdom. Dr. Chen will serve as the first director of cognitive diversity, coordinating efforts across all member worlds. The appointment was both an honor and a responsibility that Sarah had never imagined possible. From struggling student to galactic director in less than a year, the transformation still seemed surreal. Marcus and Jenny, now serving as assistant directors, would help manage the massive undertaking of cataloging cognitive patterns across dozens of species and developing collaborative frameworks that maximized their combined potential. As the assembly concluded, delegates from various worlds approached Sarah with requests for collaboration, research partnerships, and educational exchanges. The galaxy that had once seemed closed to human participation was now eagerly seeking human involvement. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when a group of young alien students approached her after the formal proceedings. They represented various species and were all struggling in traditional academic programs. Dr. Chen, one of them said through a translator, "You showed us that being different doesn't mean being inferior. Will the new programs help students like us?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own feelings of inadequacy just months earlier. "The new programs will help everyone," she assured them. "Because everyone has unique strengths that the galaxy needs." As she left the council chambers, Sarah thought about Professor ZYX Thera's original prediction that the binary examination would be illuminating. The professor had been right, though not in the way she had intended. The examination had illuminated the fact that intelligence was not a single, measurable quantity but a diverse spectrum of cognitive capabilities. It had revealed that humanity's place in the galactic community was not as intellectual inferiors but as essential contributors to the collective advancement of all species. The binary examination that was supposed to expose human limitations had instead exposed the limitations of narrow thinking about intelligence. In trying to prove that humans didn't belong among advanced civilizations, Professor ZYX Thera had accidentally proven that advanced civilizations couldn't reach their full potential without human participation. Sarah's journey from academic failure to galactic leadership had transformed not just her own life but the entire galaxy's approach to education, research, and collaboration. The girl who had once stared at failing grades in despair was now directing efforts to ensure that no student, from any species, would ever again be dismissed for thinking differently. The binary choice between success and failure, it turned out, had been a false dichotomy. The real choice was between conformity and diversity, between standardization and innovation, between narrow thinking and the boundless potential of cognitive collaboration. Humanity had chosen diversity, innovation, and collaboration. And, in doing so, they had helped the galaxy choose a brighter future for all its inhabitants.